Okay, so welcome everybody to HEA Pathways, Exploring Roles Beyond Higher Ed. I am Marnie Smith. I'm the Assistant Director of Graduate Career Services at the Marxe School. And beside me is Suzanne Grossman, who is the Deputy Director of Career Services and Alumni Relations.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody. So excited to see you here today. We are going to do a really brief poll, then I'm going to just explain briefly how the event is going to work, and then we're going to jump into talking with our panelists. So I am going to launch the poll. Can we see the poll now? Okay, great. So these are really just 3 quick questions just to get a sense of who's in the room. I myself am an HEA alum, and I transitioned into higher ed, but I know a lot of people are already working in higher ed. So it's always interesting to see the numbers, and I see the numbers going up. So we'll just give a few more seconds for folks to finish the poll, and then I will share the results with everybody. Okay, so I'm going to share the results. Can we see the results?
Yes.
Okay, so a lot of people, 70% are working in higher ed already, 30% are not, 73% working full-time, almost 30% part-time. And then, are we looking for roles outside of a college or university? Not sure. Yeah, not sure is the majority. That's okay. That's why we're doing this event. So I will close this, and just to explain briefly, we are going to do a moderated panel with our lovely HEA alumni who have been so generous to join us today. And then we're gonna kind of turn it over to you to ask questions. And all the panelists have also agreed that if you wanted to reach out to them on LinkedIn, please go right ahead, connect with them, make sure that you mention that you were in this event today, so that just to give them some context. But yeah, let's, without further ado, let's start. So I'm gonna ask the panelists, well, please introduce yourself. Tell us briefly about your background, when you graduated, and what you do now. So it's your, so this is like a 3-part question. Your background, when you graduated, what you do now. I'm gonna ask Michael to kick us off, because I also want to acknowledge that this event was Michael's idea. So thank you for bringing this idea. It's a brilliant idea. And yeah, okay, I'm gonna turn it over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Brick. My pronouns are he, him, his. I graduated from the higher ed program in 2014. I am currently the Senior Research Analyst at the Institute for Higher Education Policy in Washington, D.C., where I work on local, state, and federal policy issues around higher education. And prior to that, while I was a student, I worked in admissions. I worked full-time while pursuing the program part-time. So I worked in admissions and then moved into student affairs and student services. And then my last university role was as Director of Student Services at the University of Maryland.
Excellent. Thank you. James, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is James, and I'm hearing a little background noise, but I'll keep going just in case. But yeah, my name is James. Currently work at the TEAK Fellowship as the Assistant Director of Fellow Success and also 9th grade program manager. Basically what that just means is I'm one of the program's deans / counselors. Prior to that, I was Assistant Director of Admissions at TEAK Fellowship. And before I came to TEAK back in 2018, Baruch was basically my home for a long time. I actually went into Baruch in 2010 for my undergrad years, then graduated in 2014. From there, I started working at Baruch, so I do have some higher ed college experience in general. Was working there for a little bit with the Urban Male Leadership Academy Scholars Program and the TEAK program. And then from there, 4 years later, transitioned on to TEAK with, of course, the help of my mentors who I met through the HEA program, but also the career counseling offices, which Suzanne really helped out a lot with that as well, back when I was searching for different jobs. So that's a little bit of my background, and I'll get into more specifics in a few. Marnie, you're still on mute.
Jonelle, I'm wondering if you want to go next. And just as a reminder, tell us a little bit about your background when you graduated and what you do now.
There we go. I was on mute just now, sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Jonelle Gulston. So I graduated Baruch in 2016, like the fall of 2016, I graduated. I currently work at Bottom Line. It's a nonprofit. We work with our first generation low-income students throughout New York City. So I've been with Bottom Line for about 5 years now, about 5 years. I'm currently the Success Program Director, so I'm in charge of our college program. Before that, though, I worked as our Access Program Director, and I did that for about 2 years. And then before that, I was a Success Team Manager. So I managed about 5 people who had a caseload of about 80 advisors. So been kind of progressively moving through Bottom Line, and it's been really great. Before that, I worked at Kingsborough Community College in the ASAP program. I was there for a very long time. So I kind of want to consider like my first adult job where you get benefits and all those fun things. But I worked there for a really long time, and it was a really great experience. But working at Bottom Line has definitely helped me grow professionally. So definitely excited to share my story with you guys.
Excellent. Thanks, Jonelle. Matthew, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. My name's Matthew Gulliford. I graduated Baruch from the MSEd program, I think in 2013, so a while ago. Before that, you'll probably tell from my background and my accent, I'm British. So originally I worked at several London institutions for probably around 10 years before I came to the US to join the program at Baruch. And I worked, my last job there before I moved was at King's College London, where I was the business development manager, which was really focusing on improving access to King's College London for surrounding community colleges. So for those of you who don't know King's College London, it's kind of like an Ivy League equivalent in the UK, very prestigious, very non-diverse at the time, and all led by white men. So the idea was to improve access across London for vocational learners to come in to do a degree program. So I did that for a while. And then when I moved to the US to do my MSEd, I worked as a graduate assistant in the Marxe School of Public and International Affairs, or whatever it's called now, with, at the time, the Associate Dean, Jerry Mitchell. And that led to then me getting a position at Baruch within the School of Public Affairs after I graduated. And I worked there probably for around 4 years, managing the assessment of student learning and accreditation for SPA. And then that led me to my job in ed tech. So essentially, when I was doing my graduate assistantship, and when I was took on my position managing the assessment for the public affairs school, part of the job was looking at vendors that we could use for technology in order to collect data, synthesize data, and be able to sort of analyze trends in student learning across the school. And I started working very closely with this ed tech company, and I did various sort of advisory groups with them and helped them with different parts of the product that I thought could be improved. And then that led to a job, and I was reluctant to leave higher education at the time, but I felt the transition was needed personally for me. And I worked for a company called Taskstream, which later became Watermark, as an account manager working with institutions across the country, helping them with their technology and assessment practices. And then that led me to my current position with a company called Qaspir, which was founded and based in the UK, which is now moving and offering its services in the US. And I'm now the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships for North America. And we are selling and using products to help institutions with online professional development for faculty and admins.
Awesome. Thank you guys. So it sounds like everybody had worked in higher ed before their current role. Is that right? Am I getting that right? Okay. And I guess my question is, would you consider going back to higher ed in the future? You're all doing related things. Would you consider working at a college or university again, I guess, and why or why not?
I mean, I can start. I'm never going to say never, but I will most likely not return to a college campus or university. Again, not going to say never if the right opportunity arose, but I think, I think what happens when we work in higher ed is the bubble of higher ed kind of takes over, right? And you kind of forget, at least I kind of forgot, that there was a world out there that didn't care about all the things that we care so deeply about in higher ed, some of which are really important, and then some of which are not important at all. And so I think, I've realized there are more opportunities to use my skills and kind of continue changing, continue growing. And there's this sense of movement that I don't know if I ever really felt at a college or university, even when I was in positions that kind of tracked you through professional growth. At a certain point, I was going to become dean of students, and that was it, right? Like, that's the end of that career moment. I could become president, but I'm not interested in that. It sounds like a terrible job. So, dean of students, that was it. That was the only trajectory I was working on. And I think having left a college and university, you realize that there isn't necessarily the dean of students role in other industries, and that things can change and grow in a different way. And so I don't necessarily see myself heading back, though, if the right opportunity came around. I'm sure I would consider it.
Yeah, I could follow up with that. I also agree with Michael. I won't say never. I also agree. Yeah, if the right opportunity comes, and depending on where I'm at professionally and personally at that time as well, of course, we'll start take some big decision factorings into that as well. But I agree also with what Michael was saying, that in regards to once I transitioned to my current job, which is TEAK Fellowship, nonprofit program, 10-year program for low-income students here in New York City, basically starting from 7th grade all the way to college graduation, it really got me to focus back on our K through 12 system. And that's something that was also really important to learn, within the HEA program as well. I mean, it's one of the classes that is offered, but throughout different courses, right? You somehow, some way, even though we're talking about colleges and universities, you still have to talk about the K through 12 system, right? And of course, even within the United States, that's seen differently throughout all these different states, right? So I think for me, it really allowed me to focus back on, the younger years of a student's, academic tenure, and really start helping them at a younger age. I'll be honest, when I graduated with my undergrad in 2014, my main focus was college age students, right? 18 and over, 17 and over, whatever that meant. As long as they were in college, I'm working with them. I don't want to work with anybody younger than that, right? And as I got more into that role, and then, you know, entered in the HEA program in 2016 and then graduated in 2019, I started really thinking about, like, wait a minute, like, there's a lot of students that unfortunately I cannot help, and it's during the time that it's you know, I believe it would better help them and better serve them to focus at the younger years to help them be more successful as they're getting into colleges and universities. So, you know, that's my thought. But again, who knows? Maybe there's an opportunity where I can still do both at a college level. So we'll see what opportunities come up in the future. But I will say right now, I'm really happy.
Awesome. And actually, I'm going to add one little thing to this question, and for Jonelle and Matthew, and if Michael and James, you want to add something on, feel free. I also want to ask, would you consider going back, and is there anything you miss about higher ed?
I'll go. Kind of answer the second part of the question. There are definitely some things I miss from higher ed. Just like I think about the getting information, so like having access to like a student's CUNY first, for example. A lot of the times we have to rely on our students telling us, you know, how they're doing in school, or like different things, or checking with financial aid. So having that like direct contact to like the school, like if you have issues with financial aid, I can have someone call financial aid office, whereas like I would, one of our advisors would need to like go through the student and kind of go through that process. So that's one thing I would say I would miss. But we kind of, in a sense, is like helping our students learn how to advocate for themselves. So definitely a big part of it is like, if we can't get that information for you, how can we help you? How can we coach you? Speak to different offices on your campus to get the information you need. And then the first part, would I ever go back? Again, never say never. I would be open to going back, but it would have to be for like something that I was really looking for, which I don't know what that is yet. So I think it would have to be for really good opportunities why I would go back. I've always dreamed about working at Brooklyn College. That was my undergrad. So like if something came up there, potentially maybe, it would really have to like depend on the situation and stuff like
that.
Cool. Yes, following suit. I guess, and I'm sure the other panelists will agree, I feel like I still work in higher ed, albeit under a different spotlight. And by spotlight, I mean, I work for a corporate for-profit company, and maybe this is different from some of the other panelists, but you know, I have very specific KPIs that I need to achieve. It's stressful. I have to meet numbers in terms of sales. So although I feel like I'm very much ingrained in the higher ed community because I'm constantly talking to, you know, provost or associate provost or deans at universities and faculty, I, albeit enjoy that experience with them, but then I have to try and sell them something. So it's very different in terms of the corporate spotlight or pressures that are on me. But yeah, I work with higher ed every single day. I'm all about trying to support them and enhance the work they're doing through technology. So I wouldn't say that you know, I'm not that far removed from what's currently happening in higher ed. And then I will say one of the advantages that I found from taking this position and my prior position after leaving Baruch was that I now work with institutions across the country and in some cases across the globe. And I'm really able to get different experiences from different colleges. Although higher ed is all somewhat similar in, you know, a grand sense, lots of institutions are very particular and have different sort of competing priorities. I will say that if I were ever to go back to higher ed, I'd probably want to go back to somewhere like Baruch or a public institution. I work with many private, even nonprofit and for-profit institutions, and they're a complete, I want to say shit show. I'm just going to say it. Like a lot of them they're completely very difficult to deal with, and including NYU. I don't suggest any of you well, maybe some of you already work there, but very siloed, difficult to organize. And it's the same. And that's the one thing I don't miss about higher ed is the sort of siloed nature. But I will say the one thing I really miss is I'm still, even though I go to a lot of conferences, I speak to a lot of people in higher ed, I still feel like an outsider. It was very interesting as soon as I took this job and I attended the same conferences that I did when I worked at Baruch, I was immediately cast off as a vendor. So even in one session, I was in one session a couple of years ago, and the presenter said, well, we shouldn't talk about that. We have a vendor in the room, which was me. And it was a very bizarre sort of transition. But the main reason I would say for people to look outside, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a different industry, but I found that when I was at Baruch, I was very pigeonholed into a certain career path, and there wasn't any room for me to develop or be promoted. And I think that happens a lot in higher ed. And my suggestion would be get out of that department, get out of that office, and either look at another office or another college or another institution or even another company, because you can stay pigeonholed with a bureaucratic, framework in higher ed, and you just need to swerve out of it, because from my experience, it doesn't change. So if you're not getting promoted and you're not being recognized, you need to switch the gears somewhere.
Cool. Anything to add, Michael or James, or shall we move on? Okay, let's keep going. So, question for everybody, another two-part question. First part, why did you decide to enter the HEA program? And second part, how did your graduate degree at Baruch prepare you for your current role? Anyone can start.
Yeah, I could start it off this time. So let's see. So at the time, I graduated Baruch with the undergrad in 2014. I was fortunate to be offered a position within the TEAK program, which is one of the higher education opportunity programs within CUNY. And, I was working there for 2 years. I really started to feel that, all right, education and higher education was really was my calling. Like, this is exactly what I wanted. I felt fine. I felt everything was good. And I found out that Baruch had a program. Some of my colleagues actually graduated from the program back in their days. So they highly recommended it. Of course, I did my research and all of that, but eventually I knew Baruch was, my top choice. And thankfully I got in, and I continued my years at Baruch. But thankfully, I think at that time I really had a strong support network in regards to, really encouraging me, at a young age. At the time I was single, didn't have, any main big responsibilities. And a lot of people were telling me, look, James, like, if you got the time, if you got the energy, this is the time to really start exploring, a graduate degree program. And especially with something that, you show some high interest on, which again was higher ed. So I was like, you know what, it's been 2 years. I think I'm ready to go back to school, that began my whole 3 years at Baruch, my 3 continuing years, but now with a graduate program at Baruch. And to be honest, I mentioned some of this before, but what I was really happy about learning within the HEA program was, one, really focusing on the finance level, the financial levels and conversation on what it takes to, run an organization, run a school. What does it mean to potentially have tough conversations, for example, having to let people go, or potentially ending certain programs or departments just to, have enough, financial flow within your institution to keep running. And I thought that was really eye-opening. I was never really a numbers person. Math wasn't really never my thing, but now that it had some context behind those numbers, and of course a lot of other things, it's definitely something that really opened up my eyes. And it's something that now actually in my current role, I'm always, letting my executive director know, or I'm letting the development office know, like, hey, if it's possible, can I join your meetings? Can I join your financial meetings? I would love to understand the financial component it takes to run an organization, like TEAK Fellowship, which, we're a small org compared to a institution, compared to like a Baruch College, but still, I think those are transferable skills that, would help me in any situation, any organization. And also just the K through 12 system, right? So I mentioned that earlier. It's something that, again, no matter the class, it didn't have to be called K through 12 policy course. Almost every class somehow, some way included some portion of what K through 12 meant towards, a public or private college or university institution. So it really opened up my eyes to those two things. Of course, many more things, but those two were really stuff that, till this day, it's really important, and it's stuff that I practice at my current role.
Thanks, James.
I mean, I chose Baruch because I was looking for a program in New York City where I was living and working at the time, and I liked the diversity of the program. I did my undergrad at NYU, and I looked at their program, and I looked at Columbia's program, and besides the cost, which Baruch certainly beat both of those out, let's be real, the emphasis on kind of students and that diverse student experience I really appreciated. I think one of the best things about Baruch's program, and really one of the most unique things about Baruch's program, is that it's in the School of Public Affairs versus the College of Education. That sets you apart. It really does. Just the sheer fact that on my resume it says School of Public Affairs, and for someone who now works in public policy, that was a nice foot in the door. I also think the ability to take those MPA classes was a big advantage for me. I knew I was interested in public work. I was thinking at the public university level. Now it's slightly different, but I think it's a big, big advantage that folks do not take enough of. It's very, very unique for a program like this to be based in a school like that. And so I appreciated it. And I think I learned a lot from those MPA classes and just from connecting with MPA students, in addition to a lot of what James said in terms of the financial management stuff too, which is not included in every master's program, but I still remember my assignment having to slash whatever the amount of budget it was. That is a skill that I have honed and like continue to use from what was, I think, my like third semester in the program.
Thanks, Michael.
I can go if, I think for me, I was moving from the UK, and all my experience was in UK higher education. And I find that although there's lots of similarities between the UK and US, that I needed to have a more formal degree in higher education administration for the US. And, to be truthful, I didn't really think I needed to. I already had a master's before I joined Baruch, and I didn't really think I needed one. In the UK, if you have a master's, it doesn't really, in whatever discipline you have your master's, it's a master's. So I find that in the US, if you kind of want to work in higher education administration, you kind of need something which is a bit more specific. So I decided to go to Baruch. I knew someone who was in the business school, and it just seemed, an easier way for me to start my career in the US. I will say that what did happen, and I don't know if it's similar to many others, is that even though I had 10 years of experience and I already had a master's and a bachelor's and I was a qualified teacher, when I came to do my MSEd, Post that, I was still treated like I was just fresh with no experience. So I don't know if other people have somewhat experienced that, but you know, that's another way, another reason to navigate out of maybe working at the institution you got your degree from. The other thing I wanted to just add is that I'm now doing my doctorate in higher education administration. And if anyone's interested in learning more about that, then I'd be happy to talk to them. And I do think from a personal perspective, even working with institutions now, and also when I was at an institution, I think it's highly valuable to have a doctorate. So I know it's difficult, and I know it's another, you know, several years after you've done your master's, but I highly recommend doing that. I'm currently doing mine. I don't know, I've never heard of the institution before I met someone who was the director of the program, but I'm doing it at St. Cloud State University. It's fully online. And it's a very nice cohort model for an Ed-D. And they also take 12 credits from your Baruch's MSEd. So if you're interested, if you want to learn more about it, you can get in contact with me.
Hi, and so sorry, my computer just died, like it's making a weird noise all of a sudden, so I'm connecting my phone. Never noise before, so I'm a little worried, so I need to take care of that after we finish on the call. But just to answer the question, I decided to enter the banking. I didn't necessarily know that working in college was a job, but that you can like academic advisement, kind of like I didn't know that was like a real thing. So after I kind of stitched myself, like this is kind of the work I want to be doing.
Oh, Jonelle, sorry
to learn.
We're having a little trouble hearing you. Do you want to?
Decided to go back to school, and Baruch was the best option. Definitely made more sense for me. All right, guys, 1 second. Hear me now?
Yeah, I think that's a little better.
Okay, sorry about that. Oh, God. Today is the day with all of the tech issues when I don't know why. Can you guys? Oh, Jesus.
Jonelle, can you hear us?
It might be better if she just calls in instead of doing the web link.
Jonelle, do you want to try calling in? I'm not sure if you can hear me. I'll go and send her the phone number. Let's go on to the next question, and we can always come back. So for next question, tell us about your motivation for choosing an opportunity that is outside of the college and university setting. And can you tell us a little bit more about what you do, like on a daily basis?
James saw me laughing because he knows my response to this question, which is money, y'all. No, I mean, that's legitimately the reason. And I was in, and I'm just me full disclosure, I was in a high paying job for higher education. You know, I was a director level. I had a very nice salary, but I knew that that was going to be capped at some point. And honestly, I was sick of doing more work than people making a lot more money than I was, like faculty. So, and deans, and just people who clearly were undervaluing my work and my existence. And so I left for money. And I am not ashamed by that. I volunteer, I do good stuff with lots of people. Like, I wanted my money. What I do on a day-to-day basis, you know, in terms of what I get paid for is, honestly, I write and read and talk to people about issues in higher ed policy. So I currently focus on two main portfolio areas, on civil rights and equity issues within higher education. And then I also do a lot of work on the intersection between criminal justice and higher education, so removing barriers for currently and formerly incarcerated folks. And I teach inside prisons as well. And so a lot of what I do is writing research reports, policy analysis, briefings, all of that stuff on these different policy issues. And then I'd say about 50% of my job is meeting with legislators and policymakers to inform better practices. So anytime a piece of higher ed legislation appears, we're typically consulted in either the writing of that, the release of that, or the editing of that in order to make it as equitable and fair and applicable to circumstances. Right now, that's particularly challenging with our government being what it is right now, but that is a lot of the work that I do. And so, you know, there's a lot of similar experiences from higher ed administration, certainly. Talking to people, thinking about equity and diversity issues, things like Title IX, I have to know a lot about, financial aid, Pell Grants, all of that good stuff. I just happen to get paid a lot more to do it now, with like regular bonuses and things that like the rest of the world seems to understand, but higher ed doesn't really always implement. So yeah, that's kind of why I did it, and I really enjoy it.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, I think for me, it was multiple reasons. One, at the time that I was working at Baruch, I was actually, I mean, it's CUNY. I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with City University of New York. But I mean, sometime in the program, you'll definitely learn about the CUNY system, SUNY systems, and other systems in the United States. But at the time, I was actually doing full-time hours. So I was hourly, but working on 2 part-time lines, right? So there was a way where my program at the, you know, the TEAK program where I was working at, they were able to offer full-time hours, but basically having like 2 different roles, but it all kind of combined and, you know, just make believe it was kind of like your one full-time job. Which, you know, at the time I was young, you know, fresh out of college. I mean, I didn't mind it. You know, hourly comes with its own perks, of course. But, you know, little by little, I started to feel like, all right, you know, these perks are not, you know, really, you know, matching up my lifestyle at the time. As I started getting older, as I started, you know, now wanting to focus a little bit more on, you know, overall, like long-term savings, retirement, you know, what it comes to be with like full-time, like, you know, health benefits, et cetera, right? So I had to start thinking that way. And then the other side of it too is, to be honest, I started to feel, and I think Matthew talked about this earlier, I started to feel that, you know, and realize that there was no level of me or no level of or way for me to move on up. Like I started to feel like I was kind of getting stuck in the same position. And don't get me wrong, I loved it. I loved, you know, the students that I worked with, the colleagues that I worked with. But eventually, you know, again, it didn't match what I started professionally and personally feeling like were my actual growth, like, you know, growth moments for me. I started to feel like I was just stuck in one linear place. So, you know, eventually, you know, I started applying out, and, you know, long story short, one of my mentors who was also a IHEA alumni, you know, sent me an email and was like, hey, James, I know this is not fully college or fully, you know, university based, but it seems like it's a program that still works with college age students, but it starts all the way from 7th grade. Are you open to that? And I was like, you know what? At this point, I'm open to anything, you know, and I actually started wanting to get a little bit more into like external nonprofit programs aside from, of course, colleges and universities. So it was all, just great timing, and thankfully I got the role. And, from there, when I first went into TEAK, my day-to-day was all about admissions. So, really prepping our information sessions for potential candidates, talking to families constantly, which was a lot different than what I was exposed to, because in college, you never talk to parents. So this was something new that I had to learn and be more comfortable with, especially that a lot of them, they'd also speak Spanish. So I speak Spanish, but it's not the best. It's like that Spanglish. So it's really allowed me to practice my Spanish a lot more. And I'm a little bit embarrassed about that, because as an Ecuadorian and both parents of mine speak Spanish fluently, I should know and feel more comfortable with Spanish, but hey, it is what it is. But it's something that I am, to this day learning and continuing to learn. But, those are just a few things that, of course, is really important within our program, the application process, making sure all the families are handing in all their documents that we need. And then eventually, we do have interviews, we do meet them in person, and then from there, they actually enter the program into their 10-year, tenure, basically. Now, more recently, I transitioned over to being a dean, or like a counselor, for our current fellows. So of course, that just means, checking in with them, checking in with their schools, checking in with their parents, making sure everybody's on the same page, as well as also organizing different, internal programming events for our students, because we're not a school, we're just a program. So they still attend their, specific junior high schools, colleges. So I plan internal TEAK related events for the students and families. So that's a little bit about my day-to-day and overall journey and why I transitioned out of Baruch College into TEAK Fellowship.
Yeah, I agree with James, and I think a lot of the time, I think in general, I actually was looking over my LinkedIn profile the other day, and I've very rarely stayed anywhere longer than 3 years with one organization. I'm not suggesting this is something you should do, but for example, my husband, he's worked for his company for 16 years, and he very much is institutionalized with that company, and he's, I think would find it very difficult to break away from it. So in general, I've stayed in places for around 3 years, and that it hasn't ever been a conscious choice. It's just naturally happened that way. And one thing that I've really learned over the years is, you can moan and you can be like, oh, I'm not getting promoted, this isn't happening. You really just got to take control and change the narrative yourself and just be like, you know what? I'm open to opportunities, I'm getting out of here. And for my case, I really loved working at Baruch. I really loved the program, and I still am very much in contact with lots of people who I studied with and I worked with. And some, including, the associate provost is one of my references. So I have and they use our product. So I have a very close connection with Baruch. But at the time, when I was looking to sort of advance my career, I was stuck with this sort of bureaucratic process of, we can't make you a director because this other person who's worked here for 10 years, they want to be a director, but they're not going to be a director, so we can't really promote you higher than them because it will cause conflict. And I'm just like, you know what, I can't be doing with this. So really, and the reason, one of the great ways to transition, and I would be happy to speak to anyone who wants to look at sort of transferable skills, I milked that to the max. So what made me think that I could move outside of higher ed is I applied for many jobs within the higher ed space at the time I was looking. And then I also saw other jobs and I thought, I have transferable skills for this. And one of them was at Google, for example. They were looking for someone, they were starting these small certified programs, and they needed to be accredited by New York State, and that I had a lot of experience in the accreditation process. So really, and I didn't get the job, but I got to the final round and it was a great experience. But it really made me think about how you can transfer your skills. So for example, I worked a lot with very difficult faculty and I had to get them engaged in doing something they didn't want to do, and it was compliance based. So there was a real skill there of how you build relationships with faculty, how you can motivate them, how you can engage them into a process which they necessarily don't want to do. I find that a lot of my interviews with corporate companies really focus on behavioral type questions. So they ask you for an experience, or tell me about, and I know this is common, like tell me about something you're proud of, but they really go deep. Like Amazon is real crazy with that stuff, but I really enjoy doing it. But they really talk about, tell me about something which didn't work and how you overcome it. There's many examples you can give in higher ed where you've experienced things like that. So the transition isn't difficult if you're in, you know, for example, if you're using a product in student affairs to help with enrollment, that product could be interested in you working for them because you have direct experience with not only using the tools, but also engaging people on campus to use it. Anyway, in terms of my day-to-day job, I'm talking to, you know, sort of leadership people at institutions and showing them how we can help support them in the types, and maybe I will do some demos of the product. Maybe pre-COVID, I would go and visit the institution and I would have, you know, a lunch and learn with faculty or staff. And then my other side of my job is really sort of looking at the product that we're selling and how I can give my expertise of my experience in higher ed to make the product better. So I'm working with lots of different teams who don't necessarily have experience in higher ed, but they're excellent product developers or excellent engineers. So that's the part which really sold me when I left higher ed. It was being able to take my expertise in higher ed and have it valued in a different market. So I think that's one key thing people should remember is if you want to stay in higher ed, you stay in higher ed and you can develop your career and maybe earn your doctorate and become, you know, leaders of, you know, your administrative teams. But also we have a lot of experience and we have a lot of direct experience in companies who work specifically for higher ed, including people like Salesforce, Amazon, Google. All of these companies value your direct experience, but it's just that you have to get out there and be able to sell yourself to the level that you deserve.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. So Jonelle is back on via phone. Thank you, Jonelle. And I'll let you go first. We're going to wrap up our moderated piece with just asking, Matthew gave us a great transition to a question about transferable skills. And I just wanted to ask Michael, James, and Jonelle, and we can let Jonelle go first. If you have any other thoughts just quickly about transferable skills, or if you wanted to mention other opportunities kind of outside of higher ed proper that people should be looking for. And for everybody else, if you want to put questions into the chat, we will try to get to a couple of your questions. So let's go to Jonelle. Jonelle, tell us any thoughts on transferable skills and opportunities that people might want to be looking for.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry about that again. So I guess I would say with transferable skills in general, like working from a college to a nonprofit, for me, it was really about just like organization and really my job can be very fast-paced sometimes, and I think at colleges at certain times of the year it can be very fast-paced. So really being on top of things, organization, planning, those are some of the big things that I took over from working at Kingsborough to working at Bottom Line. Just the need to stay on top of things and the need to be organized, because it feels, especially I think in the role I have right now, it feels a lot of like nonstop sometimes. I just started my new role in May. So, you know, still getting the lay of the land, and, you know, working from home again has its own issues, but I would definitely say for me, some of the transferable skills are just really about organization. And I think I learned a lot of that at Kingsborough because I was able to, I managed my caseload of students. I was able to really learn from a lot of people who worked. I think that's one of the benefits of working at a CUNY or at a college. You usually have colleagues who've been in those jobs for a couple of years. So I think that it just allows you to learn. So a lot of the things I was able to learn from them, I was able to bring over. And the highlight for me was just about organization and planning at the end of the day. The more and more I do that, the more and more I feel more confident and comfortable in my work. And then I would say for those who are looking, for me, it was like I needed another job, period. So that's kind of how I landed at Bottom Line. I was like, I need something else. I need to grow professionally. I wasn't getting that opportunity at Kingsborough. It just wasn't going to happen. And I feel like since I've moved to Bottom Line, I've been able to progress in my career much faster than I would have if I had stayed at CUNY. And eventually, I think I would have been able to progress. Just this is giving me the skills I need. So if and when I go back to a college, I'm able now to apply for jobs that I probably wouldn't have been able to apply for before. So I think people just about being open to looking for things outside of higher ed. Nonprofits are a really great place to look for work. Usually the one I work at anyway, I can speak for it. It's very community based. Like a lot of the time we are talking about a lot of the activities we do in the office are about like self-care and like how to be mindful and compassion fatigue. So like a lot of it is not just work. I think for me at our nonprofit, it's just so much more than that. It's a community of people who are like-minded and believe in the same mission and the same values. So kind of the things I would say if you're looking for a job, especially outside of CUNY or outside of a school, you can be a little discerning in what you're looking for because a lot of nonprofits have a lot of great things to offer. So you definitely could to really dig deep and find what you connect to and make sure you're connected to the mission as well as the values.
Awesome. Anything to add, James or Michael?
I just posted a Facebook group in the chat that I've been really loving, which is the Expats of Student Affairs Facebook group. That's where this panel idea actually came from because I did a panel for them. Tons of job postings in there related to higher ed and a lot of really great folks who ask really great questions about transferable skills, interview questions, all of that stuff. So it's a really great place, I think, to check out. Truthfully, what I've learned, and I think I'm very passionate about the issues that I work on. Passion is not necessary for a job. I don't know. I'm like, it's just not. It helps, certainly, but it's not necessary. Like you can take your skills, take them elsewhere, make more money. And with that more money comes more time to do things that you're really passionate about. Like volunteer and sit on boards and like hang out with your family. And so yes, I think it's super great to be passionate about what you want to do, but don't limit it to just that. And I said this when we were planning this panel, the world needs people with your skills. Project management, dealing with difficult people, dealing with different people, right? Different identities, different communities. This is something that not everyone has. And so every industry needs higher ed professionals to work there. And remember, they're lucky to have you just as much as you're looking for other opportunities. And so, you can always type in the word education into Indeed or LinkedIn and see what comes up because you do have a master's in education of some sort. And that's a really great place to start to see just even what's out there. Training and development roles, learning and development roles at corporations, project management. I think if you can get your project management certification, because a lot of what we do in higher ed is project management, right? Tasks lists, deadlines, timelines, coordinating between people, that's project management. So if you can get your certification, you can basically translate that commencement that you're planning into the release of a tech product, same steps, just different people. And that pays pretty well and is, I think, always interesting and keeps it, changing.
Cool. So let's go to at least one question from our lovely attendees. So Rosemary asks, to any of the panelists, well, we can just have one person answer in the interest of time. Matthew, you brought up the great point about interview questions, and have folks noticed that interview questions have changed throughout your career? And is there any specific question you want to tell folks to be prepared for?
Yeah, I guess if along the lines of some of the immediate questions when I was leaving higher ed and I was interviewing with, you know, corporate companies, and I think it's different, say with Michael, James, or even Jonelle, that the nonprofit space is, I think, more of a natural transition from higher ed. And I think if you look at for-profit or this, you know, that real corporate mentality, one of the first questions I got from a CEO actually of a small ed tech company I interviewed for was, you know, you've worked in higher ed, you do know this is a for-profit company, how are you going to be able to manage that? So they're really, the bottom line is about the fact that they need to make money and they need to be able to work with someone who understands that, coming from higher ed where it's more. So really pulling on your skills in higher ed, I was, you know, saying that, well, this, you know, even though I work for a public institution, I'm still working with a program that needs enrollments and it needs successful candidates and it needs to be appealing to employers. So constantly meeting those objectives, really thinking about those behavioral, and you can do a really quick Google search on behavioral type responses to questions. I've now found that when I have interviews, and I recently went through a round of, I probably had about 60 different interviews since COVID, because I left Watermark and then I was a couple of weeks, there was no COVID, and then suddenly I had all these interviews and then suddenly COVID happened and it was all a bit crazy. But I really started to think about that, those interviews that I was having, rubbish questions such as, tell me something about yourself which isn't good, or tell me something you struggle with, like those sort of questions. I had one person ask me, name 5 things you're not good at. I'm just like, I'm checking out of this, because real behavioral questions which ask about how do you deal with an experience, how do you deal with a challenge or an opportunity with prior experience, is the best type of questions. And for me, it really started highlighting the good companies versus the ones which aren't that great. So I would Google behavioral type questions. You're all be familiar with it, but it's just like tweaking your mind to how you answer them. And even if you go into an interview where they're not specifically asking behavioral type questions, you can use that sort of methodology to push forward. So personally, I think the best companies, and from my experience most recently, really ask behavioral type questions. And I just wanted to, one final thing I wanted to add. I know I work in sales. If you do want to move over to EdTech, it's not about selling. You can work in other departments such as implementation, learning and development, strategic planning, support-based roles. So don't think just if you want to move to the corporate world that you have to start selling and meeting those type of demands, because there's lots of opportunities, and I work with lots of teams of people who don't have that responsibility.
Great. Thank you so much. I hope everyone will join me in thanking Michael, Matthew, Jonelle, and James. This was an amazing panel. I know that some of you need to hop off, which is fine. If you didn't get your question answered in the chat, this is a great way to connect with the panelists after this. So if you go on LinkedIn, say, hey, I really enjoyed the event. I didn't get to ask you this question. Would you be able to connect with me? That is a great way to start networking with these folks and get some more information. So thank you again to everybody. Please take care of yourself, stay healthy, stay well, and thanks for being here. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.